Right. Dratanos. Pretty strong indication that 2022 is still very much the plan. 90+% of talent trees are ready for this switch, I think. Definitely a bummer for a few. Hopefully there is still room for medium-sized passes of a few trees. From Liquid Max, people will for sure doom about it, but this is true. 90% of trees are actually very good, barring some minor pathing issues or bad talents. Really sucks for a few specs. They're going to be left out to dry, and we'll have to wait until 10.1. Like, there certainly has been worse.
That's the thing where I am definitely looking at this, because I basically didn't touch beta for a while. And I kind of went, okay, well, here's the trees. And I said, okay, what was I logged into? I think it was Rogue or something I logged into. And I went, okay, has this changed since I last looked at it? And I was like, this is totally different. Oh, this is way nicer. Holy shit. And I can see they revamped a lot of their design philosophy on this to go... basically, the trees are now recognizable as actual talent trees with choice, as opposed to a massive hodgepodge and all of them different. They found a unified design philosophy, and for jobs or classes, specs that were designed with that in mind, you can really feel it and go, oh, this is actually obvious to me now. Whereas the first couple waves were, what the fuck is this? And they're like, oh, this is obvious to me. Oh, there's new things in here. Oh, I can make builds? And talent trees? Like in World of Warcraft? The 90% or so of specs that can do that, I'm actually like, whoa. I didn't expect it for Resto Druid, but I did the raid testing yesterday as Resto Druid, and I was throwing together a spec. I was like, I can make different specs based on like different things I want to play with or need to play with. I hope this is balanced. I doubt it will be. I'm sure there'll be a cookie cutter, but if I'm willing to experiment, that's pretty nice.
Do you know what I thought was cool? And this is a very really resonant thing. I mean, I remember way back in the day, like actually this is around the time of my first ever Paladin. I remember taking that through Zangarmarsh. Oh, good times. Anyway, back on topic. It was the idea, of a Shokadin, right? And as far as I'm aware, Shokadin was like never really a thing to raid with, but it was the idea that you could just put everything towards this one weird thing and, oh, hey, this is novel. And I was, of course, as you do, sitting there on YouTube, pulling the slot machine that is, clicking the home button, or just, when you sit there, you're like, I'm going to refresh this page until a pretty icon appears, and I'm going to click on it and watch that video because we're all destroyed by the internet. Fantastic. But one of the videos that popped up in the slot machine for me was from Willy.
Willy Wonka?
Yeah, from Willy Wonka. It was, the one, it was like 5 or whatever it was, like a list video. It was like bizarre Wrath of the Lich King specs. Right? And there is just a little bit of me that looks at the stuff in Dragonflight, and I just kind of think, oh yeah, you could just do something that's weird. I remember actually, I've been a little bit down on hunters for a while. It's just a personal preference thing. That's all it is. I'm not saying hunters are bad, just personal preference. But I remember you told me, hey, you just hit me up in like Facebook. You're like, hey, I've got a build that doesn't use aim shot at all. And I was just like, what the what?
I don't know if that still exists or if it was any good, but it was possible.
Yeah, and it's just the fact that the weird shit is possible. Yeah. I just think that's cool. It's fantasy forward, and there's always going to be a cookie cutter, right? That's totally true. Totally true. There'll always be a cookie cutter. But at the end of the day, I mean, unless you are doing maybe Mythic plus 10 or above, Heroic raid or above, you can generally get by with anything halfway reasonable. I mean, for a lot of people in a normal mode raid, I don't mean this as a pejorative, because if I'm playing a new class, this totally includes me, you could take the perfectly optimal set of talents, or you could just go full left-hand row passives and actually make good use of what you've got, instead of go for the more, sort of BIS build, but not really have the familiarity or the skill to fully make use of it, which that is something that I think totally does get lost in the realm of, guides and all of that stuff. It's like, those guides are right, but for so many players, actually figuring out a build that you are really comfortable with, that you really mesh with, it will probably have decently, less theoretical potential, but what potential it has, you could more likely meet. So, like, there is that discussion, and then just the whole idea of, like, just make a dumb build. Just make a dumb build for the fun of it. It's a role-playing game.
Yeah, I mean, there's
Like a big bongo world quest build, right? You could just try to make some build for a world quest that goes 100% into like just a few things that lets you just pull all the mobs in the universe, kill them at once.
Yeah, so that's where we run into problems, right? Where, and this is something I feel from playing different parts of Wrath as different parts of hybrid builds. Even if they add expression to the game, there's not really many arenas for that expression to come out, because everything is kind of lobby game, do the M+, which means you want to do the biggest M+ build for that week, either Tyrannical or Fortified.
Torghast.
Yeah, well, Torghast wouldn't have made sense for builds
so
anyway, because it was just Torghast powers were the point there.
Yeah.
But the idea of like ability for gameplay to be expressive isn't really there, and that's the thing I noticed in the difference between literally leveling a Feral Druid in Classic versus leveling a Feral Druid in Dragonflight. And Dragonflight, I'm like, there's a little bit more skill to be found. It's more clean game design. But at the same time, I'm just kind of going, I'm just doing the motions here. Nothing actually particularly matters. I have too many tools. Nothing's hard enough for me to have to care unless I pull about 30 mobs, and then it's all just about me pressing all my buttons at once and praying that I can Primal Wrath them enough to kill them. I'm like, it's a little bit like, there's no room for that in the actual world gameplay. And I don't know if there will be, because that's a completely different idea of like quest combat philosophy. So that expression has to happen within instance content, because that's the only time where actual your class play really matters.
Yeah.
So that's like a problem going forward of that expression has to match that. You can't have, like you're saying, like, oh, it's an RPG, you have a crazy build. That makes sense if you're playing Skyrim and doing wacky shit, but you can't really do that in like a lobby unless that is an unorthodox build that does as much damage or fits a like super insane niche really well.
And then that becomes a balance nightmare, because if that thing is optimal in something like Surrender to Madness in Legion, then it becomes like the done thing. So you do bring up a good point. It's where I'd maybe say, well, you know, if you were playing Torghast, Warfronts, or Island Expeditions, then there'd be more room for weird shit, which does, I think, refocuses in on one of the points of Dragonflight, which is that it is not a hyper-expansive expansion, it is a foundational expansion. I think for us longer-term players of the game, we understand that a part of that's unfortunate, but also recognize that it's essential to the game's future. And it is interesting what you bring up about the classic gameplay. There's, in a way, so much less, but there's so much more focus on it. And I really just experienced this coming back to Hunter and having to deal with two fun things. These are two fun things that many modern hunters won't even know are a thing. Minimum range! That's thing number one. And stutter stepping. And that's the really weird thing. Because I remember raiding an ICC, right? Trying to get better DPS and work out, like, how do I actually play Hunter really well? And then I installed a swing timer. Because, you know, the swing timer for your weapon. And I make sure whenever the swing timer is about to go, I stop. That was a skill called stutter stepping. And it's a bit weird because on the one hand, you might think it's, that doesn't feel mega intense. Is that a bit like strafe jumping in some FPS game?
No, it doesn't. That was definitely a design choice at the time, because stand still shoot, you're supposed to aim.
But I mean the way that it feels.
Right, yeah.
You know, it didn't feel like the most slick design. You know, it's a bit weird. It's like, oh yeah, so your players just stutter. What? Like, that wouldn't really mesh with the game right now, I would have thought. But just playing in Wrath, it's like, oh yeah, I'm a hunter. This is a unique... There's no other class in the game that moves like this. And I have this choice. I either stutter step, and I still have really good mobility, and I get to do full damage, or let's just say shit completely hits the fan and I just hard run somewhere. But like, that's a really unique part of the very minutiae of control that is different to me as a hunter. Even the idea, like, a mob runs up to me. I mean, imagine if you just climbed over the table and tried to punch me in the face, and I was just sitting there trying to string a bow and, you know, pull some fucking Legolas elf shit, right? Or some fucking Rama shit, like RRR, right? With the fucking bow. Whereas, like, the idea of, like, a Vrykul walks up to my character and then just pulls a big pole and hits him, and I'm like, oh, yeah, it makes sense. And it did just make me think, like, I kind of want a hunter that's a red mage. I want survival. Okay, this would not be great for loads of people, because I know loads of people love SV now, and to be honest, they actually have a point. There's a bit of me that would love red mage, though. or something like that, where, you know, I'm doing my hunter shit.
Melee and range phases, yeah.
Yeah, but like when, you know, when it's time, I can you know, go do a melee thing, or even a bit of that flexibility. But anyway, that's kind of beside the point. I think just interesting musings and class design throughout the ages, where, yeah, it's like there are less things, but there's more focus on the slow, boring things in the older phases of the game, whereas now everything is a really tight loop, and sometimes that can be uber sweaty, super, super fun gameplay. I mean, even to say something nice about hunters, people doing trick shots perfectly and getting maximum usage of that. It can be really good like that, or as you sort of pointed out, sometimes it can feel like just, you know, the motions.
Yeah, especially when your class or spec is pretty easy or simple enough in a way. Like, I've got another example of that kind of was coming into my head there. Enhancement Shaman back in the day, where, you know, Lightning Shield for more damage or Water Shield for mana restore, because mana mattered when you're out in the world, because that was like a resource that you burned through. And even as like playing Holy Paladin in Wrath, it's like, oh yeah, I don't just press all my mana buttons. Obviously, I know that as a healer, like when in combat, but out in the world, I'm used to mana like actually not mattering at all. But there's like, oh, so that's like a whole dimension of game design and class design that no longer matters because it's been simplified out and it's been moved to a different area of it. So it is just that musings on how the game has changed over the years, and like how you get back some of that original stuff when the game is very, very different. And that's where the utility problems come in, where it's like, oh, the utility problem is like, oh no, that's all raid utility, it's all M+ utility. It's not shit out in the world that helps, because that's not helpful anymore. It's even looking at things like Mind Control and Dominant Mind, you're like, they're very, very niche. Same with Control Undead. Whereas Control Undead would have been big as hell leveling in Wrath. But now you're like, unless it's designed as part of a dungeon and capped within that to not be, you only bring a DK for M+, you're like, that's a bit interesting. A bit interesting, and it's very much changed in that way, I think. But another part I didn't really talk about on talents was, so in Shadowlands there were plenty of build opportunities, right?
Yeah.
People gravitated towards the best, of course. Especially people gravitated towards the best all-rounder for raiding, the best all-rounder for M+. Why was that? Why did people not go for hyper-specific builds? Well, that's because of the buy-in cost. Because you had to go and get a fucking legendary. More or less. You had to go and get a legendary. Yeah. Whereas now you don't have any of those problems. You just kind of change your talents whenever you want outside of combat. Which means, obviously, you could have, 7 builds you swap between to be optimal. Or you could pick an all-rounder if you don't really feel like pissing around too much. But that barrier to entry's gone, which means you now get to just have fun. You can even try something crazy on a boss with no... even if you literally, like, in a heroic group or mythic group, are going, I'm going to try something a bit weirder on this boss, just to see if it goes well. And then maybe your damage is 10% higher. You're like, fuck yeah, I'll stick to this. And there's no real damage done if it doesn't work out. Because there's no buy-in cost, there's no penalty there.
Yeah, and I think that really, it focuses in on something, and it's an interesting game design issue. What's fun? Earning your toys or playing with your toys? And the thing there is, there obviously needs to be a balance, because if you just get everything for free, then you're not really going to feel, you're not going to feel like you earned the thing. You're not going to feel particularly great about it. That's one of the reasons why just getting talent points and building your character, even if the place that you end up is the same, the fact that you built that yourself is good. It's basically the IKEA effect, which probably doesn't apply to just grabbing the best build from a guide, but you can at least see the design benefit that Blizzard would be going for there.
Yep, for sure. For sure. There's lots of positives to the talent trees to be felt, not to be understood at a glance, because you need the time to feel with them, and they need to be good. But it's like, you know what it was? Actually, I'll have to give me a second. I have to scroll because I want to see who said it, because I agreed with that hard. Yeah, it was Fantabit said, "It feels like Dragonflight is actually WoW 2, a return to Foundation." This is something I've been thinking about a little bit. I think we've been talking about it in a chat at one point. In some ways, it very much is World of Warcraft 2, philosophically. Not literally, it's still the same game, but it's like a very subtle kind of, oh no, this is our game and we're going to do what we want with it. We're going to dial back a whole bunch to the beginning, kind of rethink what we're doing here, set up these talent trees for the future, kind of add our own flavor to it, which they've done with the Evokers. Obviously, Twink Skillies, maybe not everyone's cup of tea, but the devs really liked them, put them in, thought the audience would. So that's the game they're making. So fair fucks to them for that creative decision.
I'd always rather that. Yeah, I'd always. Yeah. Right. Loads of us. What do we want? We want beer. What do we want? We want heavy metal. Now, that's fair. That's probably my preference. But if the devs don't feel that, it would be pretty stupid to ask them to make that for me, because they're not making it because they think it's cool. So even if it's like not for me or not for you, the point is they're making it because they liked it. And it's one of those things where I personally probably would have preferred like the more traditional, like, chunky dragons. But actually, I was willing to give the Drakthir a shot. I hopped into the game and actually I was like, oh, okay. I can tell the developers really gave a shit about this. It's what you were saying about their zone. Like even their little intro zone where you first learn to glide and you kind of like go in this, everyone's fucking diving around in formation. And there's actually a bit of spectacle to it. And it really reinforces the power fantasy quite well. So I think like there are like a few little design quibbles here and there with them. There's been a little bit of stuff over the preservation range. But like broadly, I'm in support of them. It's like the sort of thing, maybe ain't what I would have asked for, but the fact that they wanted to do it is why they should do it, because they're going to do a better job in things they're passionate about versus things that, it's like they're doing it because they know it'll work. Because ultimately when you get to that stage, I mean, people think about Hollywood and they're like, ugh, nothing's risky. It's all just lowest common denominator. They're just trying to think, what will the people like? We'll make that. Rather than, be a fucking super cool creative, make the thing that you want to see. And then bam, there it is. It's a bit like, who was Marquez on? I think he was on Ali Abdal's podcast, and I think he gets this like question all the time. It's like, what's your secret? How do you do it? How do you know when to do a video? And his answer was really simple. It was just, I just make the things I want to see. And some people might say that to us or whatever. They might be like, how did you get here? What was your plan? And it's like the answer is honestly almost 100% of the time, you just make the things we're interested in. That's it. So the dev should do that too. And generally speaking, yeah, people can tell whenever people are doing something to a goal versus making the thing they would want to see.
Yeah, I mean, there's Brian Hisser says, always get a better outcome when it's done out of passion than out of obligation.
That's it.
And I really felt that in Zereth Mortis, and I really feel it in Dragonflight, where, it's not always my cup of tea, but I'm enjoying it because there's at least a soul to it. It is a very small, very yet to grow substantially soul. And I know you can all hear that, so...
This rain is insane.
Yeah, I'm going to go make sure that window's closed in a second.
Yeah, but hopefully there's no crazy storm or anything, because we are flying in the morning.
Yeah, that would be very annoying. Yes, I'll go check the window. But yeah, no, the developers have had time to put a little bit of their heart into it, and you can feel it. And you're like, oh. Maybe, I'm not super fond of a lot of your creative decisions. However, they are creative decisions, and the end result is a product that I'm kind of enjoying, so that's better than the alternative.